At 06:42, the morning sun hadn't cleared the low clouds, and the base still felt like it was half asleep. That's when she appeared, walking across the gravel entry road with a limp that wasn't dramatic, just there if you paid attention. Her fatigues were regulation cut, but faded and soft at the edges, the kind of wear that didn't come from washing, but time. No unit patch, no rank. Her boots were scuffed and laced tight, but the right one bent slightly with each step, as if her foot didn't quite follow orders anymore. Two privates unloading crates near the checkpoint looked up. One nudged the other, nodded toward her with a smirk. Nobody said anything at first, but it was the kind of silence that stretches wide. A staff sergeant, lean with sharp eyes, leaned against a concrete barrier and let out a low laugh. He tilted his cap back just a touch and crossed his arms. "Wrong gate, ma'am. This isn't the VA hospital." She didn't flinch, just kept walking. She stopped when she reached the access scanner near the front security table. Her hands moved slow, deliberate, as she placed her right wrist under the reader. A faint beep, then nothing. Red light blinked once. The sergeant scoffed louder now, calling over to a specialist watching the monitors. "Must be a training glitch. Try the other wrist, unless maybe she's just here for a tour." The scanner failed again. No data, no login, no ID profile retrieved. Another officer, this one in OCPs with a clipboard and a half-eaten energy bar, stepped closer, annoyed. Name and reason for entry. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her chest pocket and pulled out a dull metal rectangle on a black cord. Dog tag. Not the new RFID embedded ones. This was older, well used, edges worn almost smooth. She handed it over wordlessly. The sergeant took it with 2 fingers, held it up to the sunlight like it might explain her presence. He squinted at the engraving. C027, survivor. His face dropped a beat too long before he caught himself. He handed it back without a word. She tucked it into her pocket, adjusted the strap of her faded pack, and stood still. No badge, no name, but something about the stillness around her, the way her eyes scanned the yard like she'd walked into worse places, made people stop chuckling. Nobody said welcome, nobody waved her in, but no one blocked her path either. At 07:18 the yard was humming. Cadets jogged laps in loose formation. A few instructors barked from the side rails. The sun wasn't high yet, but heat was already rising off the asphalt. Near the eastern gate, a commotion rippled, small at first, then spreading. She had stepped into the open. Boots scuffed. Conversations stalled, one by one. Heads turned. Her limp was slight but clear. She wore an old standard-issue field coat. No rank patches, no name tape, no unit insignia. Just the sun-bleached green of time, like something from a different era. One cadet near the PT station let out a short laugh. Another whispered, "Charity case." From a second row of observers, someone flung a pebble toward her boots. It bounced harmlessly and rolled. She didn't react. The second came quicker, larger. This time it struck her knee and thudded into the dirt. Still, she said nothing. The noise built like static. Chuckles laced with sneers. Words like washed up and retiree drifted through the air. A tall private in his early 20s scoffed loud enough for others to hear. "She doesn't even have a unit." A group clustered near the obstacle course tilted their heads. The taunts turned casual, like background noise. Not rage, just reflex. In this place, weakness got labeled early. She took 2 more steps forward, then paused. The third rock hit her thigh. A murmur followed. No one stopped it. Then, without sound or expression, she reached down. Her hand wrapped around the last stone, small, light. She lifted it with calm fingers, looked at it, not them. For a moment, nothing moved. No shift in her face, no sign of anger, only the sound of wind through flag ropes and boots settling deeper into tension. She opened her hand and let the rock fall. It landed with a soft crunch in the dust. That was all. The group quieted, just a fraction. A few hands dropped to their sides. One instructor narrowed his eyes, not out of sympathy but calculation. This wasn't the reaction expected. Most would argue, lash out, at the very least, demand respect. The cadets didn't understand it yet, but something had changed. Behind her silence was a kind of gravity, dense, unspoken, and pulling their assumptions down with it. They had thrown judgment like they threw rocks, but she hadn't flinched, and somehow that unsettled them more than if she had fought back. Across the yard, an old staff sergeant with 20 years in paused mid-step. He said nothing, just watched. Not a single uniform among them could explain why they suddenly felt unsure. Not yet. At 0723 inside the intake station's admin tent, fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead. The non-com on duty, Staff Sergeant Klein, tapped at the terminal with one hand and reached for a clipboard with the other. A single ID card lay on the desk in front of him. Worn edges. No barcode. Just a dull, silver lamination and a line of faintly etched type CZ7 Survivor. He squinted at it. You with a reserve unit. No answer. The woman simply stood there, eyes fixed on the floor tiles, hands steady behind her back. She hadn't offered rank, file number, or battalion, just the card. He turned back to the keyboard, frowned, and typed again. Nothing. What's your last posting? He asked, voice a little flatter this time. She lifted her eyes just enough to meet his, then spoke. Eastern Ridge, Operation C027. The tent went quiet. The click of the keyboard halted. Klein stared at the screen for a moment too long. Not because the system didn't load, but because he wasn't sure he heard right. Eastern Ridge. He stood. The air changed around him. He looked past her, toward the open flap of the tent. A colonel, tight build, mid-50s, crossed ribbons, stood 20 feet off, briefing a junior officer on formation shifts. Klein raised his hand slightly. Colonel, sir, could I speak to you? The officer stepped in with clipped boots and a firm jaw. What's the issue? Sir, she said her last posting was Eastern Ridge, Operation C027. Silence. The colonel blinked. Once. Then again, slower. He didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. A shift. He looked at the ID card on the table, then back to the woman. That operation never happened, he said. His tone wasn't correction. It was defense. There's no such entry in the national records. The colonel continued. C027 is a retired designation. It was scrubbed from all intel platforms after the collapse perimeter. He was trying to sound sure, but his voice gave him away. The woman didn't move, didn't blink. How did you even know that code, he asked, a bit quieter now. Still, she said nothing. Behind them, a private stood frozen with a folder half raised in one hand. Another admin sergeant stepped back from the printer, sensing the tension. The air in the tent no longer felt like routine. It felt off, like someone had opened a locked drawer and pulled out something no one was supposed to touch. Klein cleared his throat. She's not in the system, sir. Not active, not reserve, not retired, nothing. The colonel didn't reply. His eyes were still locked on her. He remembered something. Not a file, not a name, just a report, buried deep, redacted hard, a list of survivors, rumored, never confirmed. They had called them ghosts, not because they died, but because no one ever acknowledged they came back. Now one stood 5 feet away. No one spoke. The tent held its breath. The colonel didn't ask for proof. He didn't tell her to leave. He just stood there, frozen between a past that never existed on paper and a present that wouldn't stop looking him in the eye. And in that silence, the command tent lost its authority, because every person inside knew she shouldn't be here. But somehow, she was. By ISO 724, she was seated on the end of an exam table in the base medical annex. The room smelled like alcohol swabs and old linoleum. A combat medic, maybe late 20s, scrubbed in and checked the tablet on the wall, frowning at the lack of preloaded data. No medical file, no history, no ID match. Her tone was clipped. All routine. Remove your gloves. The woman hesitated for half a breath, then peeled off the right one first. Her fingers moved slowly, almost careful. The medic glanced up from the tablet and froze. From the base of her palm to the midpoint of her bicep ran a faint but unmistakable surgical scar. It was too straight, too precise to be accidental. Too deep for cosmetic repair. The kind of line a vascular surgeon makes during emergency arterial grafting after a major blast injury. The medic stepped closer without speaking. Her eyes scanned the scar tissue. Pale. Cleanly healed. But too complex for anything short of battlefield trauma. There was slight ridge buildup under the skin. It tracked with synthetic grafts designed to replace shattered veins. The only time she had ever seen this pattern was during casualty evaluations flown in from war zones. She asked for the other glove. The left arm was no different. Same clean incision path, same sign of internal rerouting. She looked up, her voice barely audible. These were field replacement lines, combat grade, not common. Only level 1 trauma protocols authorize that level of surgical intervention on deployment. No one without that kind of injury should still be moving like she is. A second medic in the room, silent until now, crossed his arms and stepped back. He wasn't young. He'd done 2 tours in Kandahar and 1 in Marja. His voice came low. That's not med school stitching, that's ghost stitching. The first medic blinked. Her tablet screen dimmed from inactivity. The room stayed quiet. Nobody laughed. Nobody muttered. Even the enlisted staff just outside the room fell silent like the air had changed. One voice finally broke the quiet, barely a whisper. Only 1 unit came back looking like that, Eastern Ridge, Task Force 0. The woman didn't confirm or deny. She just re-gloved, 1 hand at a time. Her eyes never left the wall. She didn't need to say anything. Her body already had. At 07:39, the yard had gone still. More than 200 cadets stood at partial attention, not because they were ordered to, but because something in the air made disobedience feel out of place. The admin tent had gone quiet moments before, and now she stood again in the open. Same faded coat, same measured posture. The order came flat and simple. Strip inspection. Normally reserved for gear checks or contraband sweeps. Rare, uncomfortable, and rarely enforced outside of recruit week. But this wasn't about protocol. This was about doubt. This was about control. A senior drill instructor stepped forward. His jaw was square, voice neutral. He didn't shout. "Remove your outerwear, ma'am." The yard watched. She didn't argue. She didn't hesitate. First came the coat, peeling away slowly, 1 arm at a time. The fabric was stiff from salt and sun. It fell into her hand like memory. Next, the shirt. Standard issue. Gray. Sweat darkened in the back from the morning heat. She pulled it up and over her head in 1 motion, then stood still. What emerged wasn't muscle or defiance. It wasn't weakness, either. It was history. Her torso bore the unmistakable map of trauma, a scar that ran diagonally beneath the collarbone, clearly from surgery, 1 too clean to be shrapnel, too precise for field stitches. Grafted skin covered her left side, the tone slightly lighter, the texture almost waxy. Burn patterns. From an explosion, likely fuel-based. Puncture marks along the ribs told of internal bleed taps. Below the ribs, a strip of paler skin interrupted by tissue contraction, blast radius compression, maybe even partial lung collapse. And along her left arm, from shoulder to wrist, faded track scars, vein harvest, emergency arterial replacement, the kind used when time ran out in field hospitals. No one said a word. The silence wasn't respectful. Not yet. It was stunned. A few in the back lowered their eyes. Others looked around, unsure whether to keep staring or look away. 1 cadet's jaw trembled, not from guilt, just confusion. They'd seen action movies, heard stories, but no one ever stood in front of them with the story written onto skin. The instructor said nothing else. He didn't need to. Behind him, a corporal lowered his clipboard. The yard felt colder now, despite the rising sun. Someone near the fence dropped a training rifle. The sound startled no one. It was just a dull acknowledgement, like punctuation to a sentence they hadn't realized was being written. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to explain. Then a young female cadet, barely 20, stepped slightly out of line. Her voice cracked in the wind. "She's still alive." That was all. 3 words. And yet they echoed louder than any order given that day. The drill instructor cleared his throat, stepped back 1 pace, and nodded. "You may dress." She pulled the shirt on slowly, 1 arm at a time, as if nothing about her scars surprised her anymore. The coat followed, hanging loose, sleeves faded and soft from years that no one else could calculate. When she finished, she looked up, not at anyone specific, just through them. Not one person met her eyes, because in that moment, they all understood. She didn't wear rank. She didn't need to. At 07:49, a black SUV pulled up to the edge of the training yard. No markings, no fanfare, just a single uniformed courier stepping out, moving fast but calm. He walked past the medical station, past the confused junior officers, and handed a sealed envelope to Lieutenant Colonel Brenner, the acting commander on site. It was heavy stock paper, embossed, the kind of document that didn't move through digital channels. Brenner slid it open with his thumb and scanned the header. His face changed by the second line. He kept reading, slower now, eyes tightening. The red ink near the bottom wasn't common. Neither was the clearance code stamped directly beneath the signature. 5 digits, black border, a triangle enclosed in a circle. Most of the officers watching had never seen that insignia before. Someone asked what it was. He didn't answer. He reached the final paragraph. The wording was direct, no ambiguity, effective immediately. Command authority granted to C-027 Subject Clark, Madison. All units on base to recognize temporary leadership transition review status under federal military oversight. The seal of high command, authentic, 3-layered foil, gleamed under the morning sun. He looked up from the page. The wind had died. Clark stood several meters away, unmoving. She hadn't come closer. She hadn't asked for anything. The lieutenant colonel cleared his throat, but his voice came out dry. "She's been cleared for command authority." Nobody spoke. No one even shifted. A few officers instinctively straightened their posture. Recruits dropped their gazes. Even the medics in the background froze mid-step, unsure whether to continue or stand at attention. Just 15 minutes earlier, they were mocking her jacket, her limp, her silence. Now they watched her like something sacred. Clark didn't react. She nodded once, barely perceptible, then turned slowly, walked toward the mission board in the center of the yard, and tapped it twice. Her hand landed square on the unit roster. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The paper in Brenner's hand had spoken louder than anything she could have said. And just like that, the base remembered what hierarchy actually meant. At 07:52, the morning sun had risen just high enough to cast long shadows over the gravel lot. The air still carried the weight of what had just occurred, the strip inspection, the silence that followed. The letter from high command confirming authority that no one could comprehend. And now, she stood alone on the small wooden platform, barely a foot above the yard. No fanfare, no microphone, no podium. Just her, the same woman they had laughed at, the same one who limped through the gate with no name in the system. Now, every eye was on her. Cadets, instructors, senior NCOs, even a few officers from adjacent command posts. No one spoke. A sergeant major cleared his throat. "Permission to address the unit, ma'am." She nodded once. He stepped aside. Then the colonel, still rattled but standing tall, raised his voice across the quiet. "State your intent." She didn't raise her chin or puff her chest. She didn't posture like a leader. She just looked ahead, voice flat and level. I'm not here to train. She let the silence breathe, then finished. I'm here to choose who replaces me. Confusion rippled down the formation. Some furrowed brows. Others shifted their stance. A few whispered. The meaning wasn't clear yet, but the tone was. This wasn't about earning a badge, and it wasn't about teaching protocol. It was something deeper. She wasn't instructing. She was searching. A few cadets turned their heads. One whispered, "Is she command?" Another shook his head. "I don't think it matters anymore." Near the back, a young woman, blonde, nervous. Second week in, took a half step back. Her lips barely moved. "She's not here for us." The cadet next to her blinked. "She's above us." The words weren't meant to be heard, but somehow, they spread like breath in winter. Because even without explanation, they all sensed it. This wasn't standard military review. This wasn't an assignment. It was a selection. And she, this ghost of a woman, this survivor without insignia, was here on orders none of them had access to. An old code, a mission scrubbed from every official document. And now she was choosing someone to carry what was left of it. Not one instructor objected. Not one officer intervened. The chain of command knew better than to question orders they didn't understand but couldn't deny. She looked across the yard, not at faces, at posture, reaction. The ones who stared defiantly, the ones who averted their eyes, the ones whose hands still trembled from the weight of everything that had shifted, the weight she had brought with her. Her hands stayed at her sides, her coat hung loose again. The dust on her boots marked miles no one had tracked, and yet she stood steadier than any of them. She didn't repeat her words. She didn't clarify. That was all she needed to say. I'm here to choose who replaces me. Because after all that she had endured, there was no need to explain the fire, only to pass the flame. At 08:06, just when the silence had settled into something close to reverence, a voice cut through from the third row of formation. It was sharp, young, laced with nerves hiding under false bravado. A male cadet, barely 20, still in his first boots. His jaw was clenched too tight. His voice tried to sound sure. "Scars don't make you a soldier?" It landed flat, not because it wasn't loud, but because it missed the room. A few heads turned toward him, not in agreement, but like they were watching someone step over a line they didn't see. Madison didn't react immediately. She didn't frown, didn't raise her chin. Instead, she reached slowly into her left sleeve pocket. Her hand moved like it had done this 1,000 times. She pulled out a small object and let it rest in her palm, a military-issue lensatic compass, the kind made of aluminum alloy with worn paint and scratched edges. It didn't shine. It was just there, solid and used. She looked at him, calm. Then she lifted the compass just high enough for everyone to see. "This got me through the ridge." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "What gets you through when bullets fly?" The yard went still again. Even the wind felt like it paused. The cadet didn't answer. He couldn't. His hands were still at his sides, but he looked like someone who'd suddenly realized how small his field of view had been. Madison stepped forward one pace on the platform. Her boots landed light but final. She didn't press the point. She didn't name medals or units or operations. She let the silence stretch, holding the weight of her words in the air. That was all it took. Because no one carried a compass in a firefight for direction. They carried it to remember which way not to break. Not all warriors are the loud ones. Some of them limp into the next fight carrying pieces of the last one stitched into their skin. Some just know how to keep walking. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. She pocketed the compass again. Slowly. The cadet who spoke didn't raise his eyes. And without ever raising her voice, Madison reminded every person standing there that leadership doesn't come from rank, or scars, or ceremony. It comes from knowing what you reach for when the world breaks around you, and what still points north when it's over. At 08:11, a ripple moved through the formation. Not sound, not motion, just stillness. Deep, and sudden. A female private in the second row dropped her gaze, her hand trembling against the seam of her pants. Her breathing had changed. Tight. Unsteady. She stared at Madison like something had clicked into place. That scar across the left collarbone, the way she stood, the compass. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then she whispered it. My brother. You carried my brother. She was 17 when he left for Eastern Ridge, 19 when his body came home, zipped into a transport bag, tag missing, but someone had stayed with him, someone had held him, and now that someone stood before her, not a ghost, but flesh and bone, scarred, whole, silent. Her knees buckled slightly as tears filled her eyes. She didn't sob. She just cried in place, shoulders shaking once before she forced herself upright again. From the edge of the command circle, a full colonel stepped forward. Silver eagles on his shoulders, decades of war behind his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't salute. He walked to the center, faced her, and bowed his head. A deep, wordless nod. Not to a superior, not to not to a subordinate. To a witness. To a survivor. Then it spread. One by one, like dominoes in slow motion, soldiers followed, NCOs first, then captains, sergeants, recruits, even the ones who had jeered, the ones who threw stones, the ones who rolled their eyes and whispered slurs. They bowed. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Some did. The ground beneath them hadn't changed. But they had. No one laughed. No one moved to break the silence. It was no longer about the scars, or the command letter, or the rumors. It was about what she carried in her silence, what she had endured without asking for recognition. For a moment, Madison didn't move. Then she looked across the crowd, not as a commander, not as a legend, but as someone who had buried too many names, carried too many final words, and still stood. And in that yard, between cracked dirt and broken pride, she was no longer the woman limping from the gate. She was what they hoped to become, if they could survive. At 08:19, Madison stepped down from the platform. No signal was given, no formal dismissal, yet the formation instinctively held its breath. Boots remained locked in place, eyes dropped low, not out of fear, but out of something far quieter, respect too deep to speak aloud. She walked with her usual limp, steady and silent, one step at a time across the open yard. Her coat, still faded, swung just slightly with the breeze. The path ahead wasn't cleared for her. It didn't need to be. The crowd parted before her like water around a stone. From the far end of the field, a man approached. No uniform, no salute. Civilian coat, deep gray wool, frayed at the collar. His hair had gone thin. His walk was slow. His eyes found hers from 20 yards out and held. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. When they met in the center of the open yard, he didn't stop. He simply matched her stride. And as he passed on her right side, his hand brushed hers. Barely a touch. The kind that says, "You made it." The kind only someone who had been in that blast radius would understand. Eastern Ridge had left them both wrecked. Somehow, they had survived it together. They didn't speak. The silence between them said more than any reunion could. They had bled in the same dirt, pulled each other through fire and mortar. At least one of them had crawled back through wreckage with the other's weight over their shoulder. That moment, once buried under dust and time, returned with each step they took. Behind them, the yard remained frozen. A soft clatter broke the air. A cadet, barely through his second month, had dropped his M4 training rifle. It hit the dirt at an angle, bounced once, then lay still. The noise cracked louder than a gunshot in that silence. Madison stopped, turned. She moved to the weapon, bent slightly to pick it up. Not rushed, not stern, She weighed it in her hand, then turned it gently, grip forward. The cadet didn't raise his head, but his hands reached out in instinct. She placed the rifle into them like a lesson. Hold it like you mean it. No more, no less. Then she turned again and kept walking. She didn't look back. She didn't need applause. Didn't wait for a final command. As she and the man in the gray coat passed the edge of the tarmac, her figure grew smaller in the early morning light. A few officers finally breathed. A staff sergeant shifted his boots. A corporal wiped his face with a sleeve. They would speak of her in weeks to come, not in official reports, not in command briefings, but quietly, between bunks and during long marches, when new recruits asked who that woman was, and every one of them, from senior NCOs to wide-eyed rookies, would remember how she left. No medals, no orders, just one hand brushing another, one phrase passed to a soldier still learning how to stand, and the quiet echo of someone who walked away without ever needing to stay. At 08:26 the dust had settled, the gate had closed, and still, no one moved from the yard. Scars don't make you weak. They mark where the fire touched you and didn't win. You don't have to explain them. You don't have to show anyone how deep they go. Just walk, quietly, with your chin level and your breath steady. Those who've carried real weight will see you. They always do. You don't need to yell to be understood. You don't need a crowd to know you matter, because survival doesn't make noise. It just leaves traces, in the way you stand, the way you listen, the way you hand someone their weapon and tell them to hold it like they mean it. Maybe people judged you before they knew what you carried. Maybe they still do. But scars aren't proof of defeat. They're proof you didn't lay down. And if you've ever been overlooked, doubted, or dismissed before anyone knew your story, you're not alone. Leave a comment if this spoke to you. Or share it. Not for us. For someone out there still limping quietly through their own battle. So they know we see them too.